Charles, I forgot to put together some interesting SCREWLANDER music, and also, according to Andrew Cuomo, I'm no longer allowed to touch you. So, hi, Charles. How are you?
I'm fine, Jason.
Charles, this is a very special episode of Charles Ortel is Closing In. We are delighted to be joined by author Melissa Cronin. Hello, Melissa. How are you?
Hi there. I'm great. How are you guys?
Just fine, thanks.
Very well. It's wonderful to have you on the show. Melissa has written a new book. She's an author, and she's been totally destroying Jeff Epstein in a series of books. Her new one, Predator King, is available on Amazon.com and book retailers that aren't controlled by the CIA. You can purchase it on Kindle, which is nice because then you don't have to put on a mask and be disallowed from entering the bookstore. But you can buy it now. It's all about Peter Nygard's dark life of rape, drugs, and blackmail. I don't know why anybody would dislike any of that. He sounds like a great guy. Melissa, you want to tell us a little bit about the books and what you've been researching?
Yes. So they're both kind of different stories in terms of how they came to be. So Jeffrey Epstein, I had been reporting on him since back in probably about 2008 when I was at Radar Online as an investigative reporter. We were covering the victim's case in Florida and just, filing after filing, publishing these stories of all of the horrible allegations against him, all of the other A-list names that were involved. And at the time, I was like, why is nobody listening to this? We're publishing all these horrifying stories, and it took more than 10 years for the wider mainstream media, for the public, to start paying attention to what was happening, what he had been accused of doing. And when he was finally arrested, I wasn't even working as a day-to-day reporter anymore. But Dylan Howard and James Robertson and I had worked on Epstein before, and we just said, this is it. This is the time to put all our cards on the table, put in all of our efforts, and really hunt down every last lead that we had heard over the years, suspicions that we had had, and really try to tell the full story of Jeffrey Epstein from start to finish once and for all. Obviously, the story's not over yet, so we couldn't quite do that in one book. We are working on a sequel. But then, I had this sequel underway for Epstein. I've been working on doing some more reporting on that. And in the midst of all of this, in February, there's this news report out of New York City that this supposedly famous designer, Peter Nygard, his headquarters had been raided in Times Square, that he was under investigation for an international sex trafficking ring. I had never heard of Peter Nygard, and I'm like, how have I never heard of this man? How have I never heard of this story? I need to find out more about what's actually going on. As I went back and dug into the archives of this man's life story, as I went to the Bahamas and talked to people who had known him, people that worked on his properties, the parallels between what Epstein is accused of doing and what Peter Nygard are accused of doing was so stunning to me. And the fact that Nygard, like Epstein, was able to do this for decades undisturbed, and he's still walking free despite all of the allegations against him. It was just absolutely horrifying to me. And like Epstein, I felt totally compelled to try to get this out and try to get people talking about it.
Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in this. If we start on the Epstein book, I'm sure you're aware of the letter that was sent in, I think, was it a lawyer seeking special treatment for Epstein, reciting all of his philanthropic accomplishments. I think that letter was in around July of 2008 from memory.
Right.
My particular interest in that was they go on in the letter about all the good work that Epstein had done for the Clinton Global Initiative, which legally didn't exist at that point. And I'm curious how much you've dived in, you've been looking at the connections between the Clintons and Epstein.
Yeah, so pretty much the main thrust of a lot of my earliest reporting on Epstein was about specifically Bill Clinton's connection to Epstein. We were the first people to publish the notorious flight logs that showed he had been on the plane something like 26 times, despite all of his, protestations to the contrary. We didn't, in the first book, get into the Clinton Foundation on the level that you've done in your own work. And that is actually a focus of the ongoing research that we're just beginning for the second book, which is going to be more of an investigation of those kind of financial ties, the, quote unquote charities that were actually shell companies for a lot of his money, and, how he was able to execute his leverage and blackmail through institutions like the Clinton Foundation. So I haven't certainly done as much research as you on that, but it's something that we're really looking forward to tackling in Epstein Inc.
Yeah, because for that book and maybe your movie, there's a scene. There are many scenes you could think about, and I'm a numbers guy, not a movie person. It could be there's a trip they took in September of 2002. September of 2002 to Africa. And on that plane were an actor, Kevin Spacey, I think was on and other people. This was September 2002. The Clinton Foundation had no authority to do any international work of any kind. Bill Clinton was not an officer of the Clinton Foundation. He was not a trustee of the Clinton Foundation, but he was signing agreements with governments, with manufacturers, and people around him were collecting all kinds of money, including he was collecting money through a company called MindSpirit LLC, where a now former prisoner, Rajat Gupta, but then managing partner of McKinsey, had set the Clinton family up in this MindSpirit where millions of dollars were routed to Bill, Hillary while she was a senator, and Chelsea while she was working at McKinsey for travel expenses and other things that came to light again in this 2008 timeframe.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so stunning to me that someone like Bill Clinton, that Hillary, that they put forward this Africa trip as supposedly an example of the fact that they had done nothing wrong, when in fact, when you look at the trip, you can see the Secret Service were not on particular legs. You can see, like you said, that there were, unknown females on board with them. It just makes you really wonder, what were all the other things that they were doing that they did not, admit to, if that was the one example that they put forward as supposedly being something legit, when it so obviously wasn't. And to that point, the people that are named on the flight logs, like you said, Kevin Spacey, actor Chris Tucker, you can see J.E., that's Jeffrey Epstein, GM, Ghislaine Maxwell. That doesn't mean they were the only people on that plane.
Right.
Because throughout the flight logs, there are so many instances of just those initials, like you see there, but also there's multiple instances where they refer to unknown female.
Right.
And so you can tell by looking at that log that was just on the screen, the box was full, but there could have been any number of other people, potentially Hillary, other people in the Clinton circle that were on that flight.
Well, and another thing that's very interesting about all that is that there have to be records that, I'm not a reporter, but there have to be records, Secret Service records in the files as to where Bill Clinton actually was from January 21st, 2001 forward, because his Secret Service detail is funded by our Treasury. There have to be all kinds of records. If he needed a visa to go to these different countries, in and out of the country, how do the flight records compare to his passport records? And how about the people in his entourage, Doug Band, people like that? And then when you get into the charity land, I don't know how much you've gotten into 990s, the forms that are filled out for a charity. There's a specific entry where it says, list the value of any donated goods or services, including travel, that you received. Don't put it in as revenue and expenses, but list it out and schedule it out. And there is no such entry in 2001, 2, or in any year for air travel. Yet multiple billionaires and fake billionaires like Epstein have claimed they lent their jets.
Yeah, there's absolutely a treasure trove of further information about this that's yet to be revealed. We do know that Doug Band was actually on the flight, and some of the other flight logs he is actually named. But then in terms of the Secret Service records, yes, there has to be some kind of proof of whether he's telling the truth about that trip. My father was actually FBI during that period, and
Wow.
people like that don't even know what's going on. It's like such a deeply buried secret. At the same time, Epstein's pilot, Larry Vysotsky, he has to know what was happening on the plane, and we haven't heard anything from him yet. And clearly, the Southern District claims they're continuing the investigation, but we haven't seen anything from them, despite the fact that these people are still alive. They're still out there. They know where some of them are, and these people know the truth about what happened on the plane. They need to speak to them and make them speak publicly before they end up, dead in a mysterious plane crash.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems to me the business model that Epstein employed and maybe Nygard employed is to get vulnerable youth out of national borders into international airspace or waters, and then just, abuse them no end. And who knows what they actually do to these people. Were people killed? Were organs harvested? I mean, this diabolical stuff. And it just, the incuriosity in the mainstream press, when you see the case after case of what's the NXIVM cult, Epstein, now Nygard, and the mainstream press wants to go to these White House briefings and try to play gotcha, ignoring this gigantic scandal.
It's so frustrating. And you're exactly right. Nygard had his own version of the Lolita Express. He had a giant retrofitted jet that actually had a stripper pole in it. And I've seen photos of the inside of that plane. I've seen photos of, half naked young girls on that stripper pole. So you're absolutely right that was his MO. And that plane took these women not just to his private estate in the Bahamas, where he is alleged to have perpetrated sexual assault on them. But I have heard from two different women on the record that he was asking some of these young girls to get pregnant, then to abort their babies so that he could harvest the stem cells for himself. And that was, his personal freaky science thing that he was into. So that is just another of, like you said, the outrageous, absolutely mind-blowing allegations that are being made by people on the record and just completely ignored by the mainstream press.
I've got to interject here and share a detail that seemed obscure. However, it's becoming increasingly pertinent. I noticed that Peter Nygard is also flying a Boeing 727.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, Melissa, but the Boeing 727 is actually a remarkable and unique aircraft. It features this door at the rear, and it's a tri-jet. As you can see, it has two jet engines on the side and one here. These were designed in the 60s and utilized in the 70s for transcontinental flight because the FAA would not allow dual engine jets to fly those distances. They were deemed too unreliable. And a 4-engine jet like a 747 was a little too big and expensive to operate, so these tri-jets were developed. But they're not used anymore because servicing the third jet that is integrated into the fuselage is much more complicated and expensive, and it utilizes this S-duct. But the thing that's unique about the 727, among even other tri-jets, is this door that can be opened, even in flight. If the thing dips down below 15,000 feet, where the pressure is 1 atmosphere, that door could be opened, and you could drop out a living person, a dead person, drugs, a halo team. The CIA has even modified these jets so that the stairway becomes a bomb bay door. You could affix a JDAM, which is a guided system for any bomb, and you could basically fly a civilian commercial jet over any target and go unnoticed by military or civilian radar and basically unleash a guided bomb on any target. So the Boeing 727 is a remarkably strategic, unique platform, and it's really interesting to see that Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Nygard both flew them. The other thing that caught my attention about it is that Jeffrey Epstein's jet was built in 1969, And the notion that someone with a $500 million fortune would operate a 50-year-old jet is absolutely absurd to me. And I've spoken to professional pilots and a guy who's in the business of aircraft brokering, and he said that I was absolutely right. He would never recommend a 50-year-old 727. 20, 30-year-old jets are very common in the United States, but the 737 is the most popular jet aircraft ever made. There are mechanics and parts available for them all over the world. The 727 is very unique. It does not make sense that you would fly it unless there was a specific purpose. And the final thing I'll say about it is, did I see correctly that you collaborated with James Patterson on the first book?
No, that's actually a different, that book came out a couple years before ours, I think. But sometimes we get lumped
James
together.
Robertson.
That's mine.
I'm sorry.
James
I see.
Robertson,
You worked with James Robertson, so I got that confused.
Yeah.
So in James Patterson's book, he makes reference to Epstein having a trading floor on the jet, which is interesting. And it fits with this, fictional notion that he was a stock trader of some kind. But as Charles has told us many times, there's no actual record of Jeffrey Epstein ever conducting a trade at all. So the notion that he would have this sophisticated computer system on his jet, because remember, James Patterson, he's an author. He's not a computer expert. If there's a data center on the jet, a bank of computers, and Epstein says, oh, that's a trading floor, Patterson has no idea what it is. My question is, was it a system for recording and live streaming video, which in 1999 or 2000 would be like a superpower, because YouTube and Facebook and all these things could not do that. The iPhone wasn't even available until 2006, and it did not have streaming video capabilities. So if you had that technology almost a decade before, you could do quite a lot of things with it, and certainly making rape videos that get live streamed somewhere and are never recorded on the jet. I'm speculating, but this is what comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certainly no proof of any trading floor in the photos that I've seen of the interior of the jet. And when it comes to the surveillance, that's obviously something that has been a key part of everything that Epstein perpetrated over the years. And we didn't get proof of that in the jet. We didn't get proof of that in Palm Beach because he had been tipped off and removed the whole system before the police arrived. But I've actually seen photos from inside his Manhattan property, and there's an entire room in that property filled with computer monitors. So he clearly had surveillance cameras throughout the house. I actually saw one photo of a camera overlooking the toilet in one of his bathrooms. So everything was fed into these computer monitors in that room. And interestingly enough, there's actually also a printer in that room, suggesting that he would then be able to make hard copies of anything that he saw on those screens. Another room in the Manhattan property showed a giant industrial-sized printer. So this is a printer that could print what we call large format. So 3-foot by 6-foot versions of different photos that he had made. And there certainly were other photos throughout his property that seemed like they had been taken through surveillance or in different intimate situations that people might not have known they were being photographed. There's photographs of headless, naked women throughout his properties. There's a photograph that I describe in the book. One of the most chilling things that I saw in my investigation of Epstein is a large, about 3-foot by 3-foot photo of himself carrying a young blonde girl, probably about 4 years old or younger, on his shoulders. And that was hidden away in a dark hallway of his mansion. So yeah, some of the photos from the Palm Beach estate too. So that's just one of the areas where we're starting to learn more and more about the extent of this surveillance system.
So how far back into Epstein's background were you able to go?
In terms of chronology?
Yeah,
or...
I mean, into his high school, college.
Yeah, we spoke to people that he grew up with, kind of elementary school. We spoke to people he went to high school with. Everyone kind of across the board seemed to say that he seemed pretty normal as a young person, that there's certainly seemed to have been some turning point or some evolution into the monster that he later became. Like you have found, there were a lot of questions surrounding, I think, the Dalton period. That's where we hit kind of a block, the supposed Dalton period, you might say. So that's kind of a little bit of a question mark. But then as we move into the early Wall Street years, we certainly have the same experience as you in terms of hearing across the board that any kind of suggestion that he was a high-level trader was absolutely a lie, that he was spending his time doing arms deals in the Middle East, not on the trading floor on Wall Street.
And he got employed with some highly questionable people. Who was the person who went to prison for like 18 years or something that he worked for?
I'm totally blanking on the name right now. Sam, I don't want to say Rubenstein.
But there was, I'll talk for a while you try to remember.
We talk about him extensively in the book, and he's actually a main source for our next book that's coming out, because these two were partners in the Ponzi scheme, Towers Financial.
Right. When
that crumbled, this is so fascinating if you don't know it. So there were two investigators kind of put on the case when they were investigating the Ponzi scheme and trying to send this guy to prison. The investigators were Indike and Khan. So
what?
Yeah.
Who were they working for?
I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't quite recall, but so Epstein, this one guy goes to prison for 18 years, Epstein's partner. Epstein walks away scot-free and essentially keeps the money from, there he is, Stephen Hoffenberg, yeah. Epstein keeps the money from the Ponzi scheme. So Hoffenberg told us, and this is going to be a thrust of the next book, he lobbied the United States government for years to try to go after Epstein and get that money back and give it to the victims as restitution. And he provided them with all kinds of proof showing what they had done, showing that Epstein was still using those funds to fund his own lifestyle. And he was just like stonewalled at every turn. There's, records and letters of him with the United States government talking about the fact that Epstein essentially used that Ponzi scheme to, leapboard himself into another level of the international elite.
So wait a second. When did Hoffenberg begin to try to get the money back? Was it in Clinton era or was it HW? Clinton era?
Yeah, it was right around then.
This is very interesting. Now, in Indike and Khan, I don't know how much you know about the New York State Attorney General Charity Bureau's website, but New York State charity law is much tougher in certain respects than federal law. And on that New York State Charity Bureau site, and I can offline explain to you how to get to it, and also the California version, you can find a lot of information, a lot of detailed information. And Indike and Khan are all over New York filings for various charities. And it's really interesting. They were investigating Hoffenberg. They found this problem that Epstein was stealing money, or they didn't?
Yeah, so Hoffenberg says that, again, I don't want to name the wrong kind of authority, but I think it was kind of known, the Ponzi scheme was, coming out into public, and they were put on the investigation to find out what was really going on. According to Hoffenberg, Indike and Khan already knew Epstein at that point in time. He said to me that, they were friends. When they were put on the case, he was kind of, the writing was on the wall for him in terms of how it was going to go. But he really, even then, had no idea how far Epstein would get away with it from that point.
So it's interesting. He gets away with it in the Clinton era. And then he immediately, when Clinton leaves, needing a lot of money, suddenly Epstein gets more into the picture in 2002. Very interesting.
Yeah, I never made that connection.
Sorry, I've got to interject again because I'm just noticing some things that are piquing my interest. Our buddy there, I lost his image, Stephen Hoffenberg, he's wearing a t-shirt that said something about saving the New York Post. And it's very interesting to note that there's a lot of activity around the New York Post, Jeffrey Epstein, Rupert Murdoch, Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell. What the hell is going on with the New York Post is my question. What do we know about Hoffenberg saving the New York Post? Look at this image.
He did, didn't he? For a while, didn't he own the Post?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
So all these people connected to Jeffrey Epstein have influence over and control over the New York Post. The New York Post breaks the story of his death and runs the only photo of him, but it's somebody who looks like they have a completely different nose. And they run this weird photo of Ghislaine Maxwell eating a hamburger at In-N-Out Burger. A couple weeks after they've run 3 stories about an In-N-Out Burger, very unlikely, landing on the street in Queens. A friend of mine who's a professional food stylist said absolutely no way you couldn't drop a hamburger from waist height and have it land on the ground and look like that. Someone got the paper from In-N-Out Burger, cooked a hamburger in Queens, placed it on the street, and had this professional photographer take the picture. What do we think about all this?
It's definitely something that, defies any sense of coincidence at this point, right? The burger in itself was kind of a shocking cultural moment, only to be followed up by the doctored photo of Ghislaine Maxwell. I know we talked a little bit offline about the potential links between In-N-Out and these people, and it's definitely something that we would consider looking into for the next book for sure.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So,
I mean, the New York Post is, I've worked there. It's supposed to be a venerable journalistic organization, and no journalism organization in the world would get a photo like that of Ghislaine and not press forward with some kind of investigation and reporting. Why did they not talk to the manager of that In-N-Out? Why did they not, get more information from the person that took the photo? The fact that they didn't push that story further from getting that picture means that they had to have been complicit with the person that took it.
Not only that, I brought it to their attention that it was photo retouched, that it was not in fact taken by a bystander. I spoke with Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, who got a little bit tongue-tied on the phone. If you click on the link in the New York Post story about the book that Maxwell was reading, it takes you to her review of the book. She really enjoyed it. 5-star review, and this message here. I've become fascinated with the concept of steganographic messages being hidden in these type of news articles. Obviously, she's 57, but this photo makes her look like she's about 30, photo retouched. 3 articles, so 2 follow-ups about the mystery hamburger on the street, no follow-up explaining, oh, we were fooled, this was taken by her lawyer, not some bystander.
Right.
A lot of really weird things about this. And then the thing that's also disconcerting about the New York Post is that just last week, after Charles and I did an episode called Phallus in Wonderland about Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, and all of that stuff, they ran an article alleging that this guy, Kevin Fallon, was threatening to blow up the statue of Alice in Wonderland. Seems weird. This is not at all a strategic location, and if you were a terrorist wanting to do maximum damage, blowing something up like this in the middle of a pandemic when nobody's around makes no sense. I've dug into this story a bit and contacted the Manhattan District Attorney, one of the journalists involved, spoken to a few people on the NYPD. There are quotes from Mr. Fallon's text messages and social media posts that are referenced in this article and other articles, and the legal complaint that's registered with the Manhattan DA. However, there is no quote from Kevin Fallon that references that statue. And the question that I've been asking is the New York Post somehow trying to send a coded message to Charles and myself to lay off of this, and they could blow us up based on...
And what did we do? We
kept going.
We went back.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's certainly so many layers of coded messages. And if you go back to the photo of Ghislaine, there's another aspect of that photograph that is really intriguing to me that people haven't really been talking about that much. It's the pinky ring. So that is the centerpiece of the story, the photograph, and the way that she puts it right next to her face with that defiant glare. Epstein himself, there's photographs of him wearing the same pinky ring over the years. there's photographs of Prince Charles in Britain and British royalty wearing similar signets on their pinkies. Obviously you can't see the design of hers, but it's just a really interesting connection to me. Is that a sign of membership in some kind of society? Was that actually Epstein's ring?
No.
Did all of them have the same ring? Oh, you're wearing one too? Oh no.
Is that the same one?
No, that's not the same. This is my family.
Tell us what it means.
No, in my case, this is just Ortel, but I mean, this,
yeah.
I don't know what that is. It's not distinct enough.
Yeah, there's photographs of both her and Epstein wearing those kind of rings over the years. And it's certainly, I think it's more unusual for a woman to be wearing in general, but the way that she, puts it front and center in the photograph like that seems like a message that has yet to be decoded.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
And Melissa, isn't it also true that there's been historically a lot of news reporting that would cause the average person to think that Rupert Murdoch and Robert Maxwell were rivals and even possibly enemies, but yet there's photos of them throughout the years pictured smiling together. Obviously, much later in life, we see Rupert Murdoch with Ghislaine Maxwell. There's certainly no reason to believe that Murdoch publications have gone particularly hard on Jeffrey Epstein reporting. There's a remarkable number of links.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have one question for you. As time has passed, I know obviously, what was it, Virginia Roberts or Virginia
Giuffre, yeah.
Giuffre, or whatever. What's her married name now? Is it Roberts?
Giuffre.
Giuffre. Yeah. What is your impression about her credibility? Do you think, to me, I'll say she seems credible, but I'd be curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, she was actually the first victim that I ever knew of, and we published a first-person interview with her way back in 2008. I think it was, it might have been the first one that she did on the record, certainly years before the Miami Herald and all of that. So I've always found her credible from the beginning. I think she's somebody that, she has all of the backup. She has a photo of herself, that notorious picture of Prince Andrew with his arm around her waist. She has a diary of handwritten entries of, cataloging what happened to her over the years. She has named names and correlated places and times. It's, it's kind of like, what else could she possibly provide to someone? In cases like this, other stories that I've done, famous men like Prince Andrew will always say, well, there's no proof. So here, there's, if not a smoking gun, a gun of some sort in this photo, and he still tries to deny it. It just defies belief and common sense that she can provide so much backup for what she's saying, and people still question her just because of, maybe the way that she acts on a televised interview or something like that. It's like, what else could you ask for from someone?
Yeah. And I, for me, thinking about this whole story, I could imagine no negative comments here on Hollywood. I could imagine, Hollywood rat packers and Wall Street whiz kids, a segment of each, deciding, there's this interesting guy, Epstein, he's got an island, he's got these parties, why don't we go down there? For the life of me, I do not understand Bill Gates. I do not understand, people with a lot to lose spending a second with an Epstein, let alone Nygard, which is another story. I'm not saying that Clinton and Gates have spent time with Nygard. I also don't understand the role of Dershowitz in all this, Alan Dershowitz.
Well, if I could, I'd like to go one at a time, because you raise an excellent point, Charles. Why would someone like Bill Gates risk so much to hang out with a guy that I think it's clear everybody probably knew had some serious issues? And I think that there had to be a very good reason, or else Bill Gates wouldn't do it. And it takes us right to Alan Dershowitz, who in this picture appears to be actually at Harvard with Jeffrey Epstein. And he's represented Jeffrey Epstein, and he's now being sued by Virginia Roberts Giuffre. What do you think about all this, Melissa?
So I was actually an undergraduate at Harvard College when Jeffrey Epstein was supposedly a visiting fellow in the psychology department or whatever his title was. He certainly wasn't a big figure on campus. I remember seeing his name on the building for the Harvard Hillel, that he had donated to that, and just thinking he was another billionaire. But I think obviously for Epstein, Harvard was a kind of cachet that you can't really fake. So he had to try to buy his way into that. And I think by extension, people like Bill Gates and scientists, even as they're millionaires and even as they are really well known, they don't tend to have access to the same levels of celebrity and luxury and over-the-top debauchery that people like Bill Clinton or Kevin Spacey would have access to. So I think they were, in some ways dazzled by the things that Epstein had to offer them, private jets with celebrities and private islands. That's something even beyond the level of, the average superstar scientist. And in addition, he funded a lot of these people. And we know now that he gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to Harvard and to MIT. So to them, going to Glad Hand at a dinner or something like that was a way for them to fund their research. And in some cases, like at MIT, they knew what they were getting into and took the money anyways. So there's still a lot more to, be answered for from organizations like that, from people like Gates, about how much they actually did know and, how many deals they made with him that we still don't know about today.
Yeah, that's another thing.
We've just experienced a little technical hit over here, so give us just 1 second and we'll be back in business.
Mm-hmm. I thought you hung up on me.
No. Would not do that. I think we're good to go, Charles.
So one of the little tricks that we've discovered, in our looking deep diving into charities, is they're perfect, if they're loosely audited or not managed, they are perfect, in quotes, vehicles for laundering money. So what you can do is you tell your friends, I gave $100 million to Harvard. Who's going to check that? Mm-hmm. And who's going to go to Harvard and actually check that they received the money? And we are aware, and have documented in many podcasts, of serious charities. One run, for example, by the most highly paid hedge fund guy in the world is a guy called Christopher Hohn, H-O-H-N, Children's Investment Fund, and the Children's Investment Fund Foundation have U.S. disclosures claiming that they gave money to Harvard at an address, you went to Harvard, in Dorchester, in Quincy, Mass. They list.
That's where I was born. It's not near Harvard.
All right. Yeah, but Harvard doesn't have a development office on 225 Water Street. But nonetheless, Christopher Hohn claims that, or his charities claim that they gave money, quote, to Harvard at that address. Why is that significant? That is the office of Ira Magaziner, who is Bill Clinton's Rhodes Scholar chum, who has been who takes credit for being the chairman of the Clinton Foundation, even though he never was. Mm. So this whole area of people who want to wash away the black marks in their reputation so they can put on a Harvard sweatshirt, claiming that they're getting behind Harvard, is an area that really deserves deep focus.
And Nygard did it too. He had the Nygard Foundation and other spin-off foundations and charities that I haven't even begun to dig into yet. And he had the same kind of, he cultivated this scientific cachet around him also in the field of stem cells. And he invited professors from, Stanford and UPenn to come down to his own tropical island for conferences about stem cells and things like that. And he posted videos of various scientists gushing about him on his personal YouTube channel.
Wait a second. Sorry to interrupt. So here we have Nygard talking about breast cancer research.
Right.
And Dr. Judy Mikovits is talking about something to do with an HIV thing they were working on that had efficacy against breast cancer. And now we've also got Charles Lieber from Harvard, who was arrested, and Zero Hedge told us yesterday that he was working on nanotechnology that could enter a cell. These nanobots were so tiny, they could enter the cell and actually carry out functions without disrupting the rest of the cell. So it seems like there's some kind of connection between what's happening with COVID-19 and all these weirdos hanging around Epstein.
Mm-hmm. And Nygard was obsessed with stem cells because he, like Epstein, was trying to pursue some sense of eternal life. He believed that stem cells were the key to not just preventing the outer symbols of aging, but for allowing him to have, an unprecedented age of death. And so it is, we know Epstein was trying to, pursue freezing his head and all these different kinds of things and impregnating women out in New Mexico. Nygard was traveling along the same paths in different places. So there certainly has to be some wider web that we haven't really exposed yet.
So it's very interesting to contrast the two. And I told you on the phone that one of my good friends sold the house the first house that Louis Bacon has, is that Louis Bacon being the hedge fund guy who's across the street from Nygard at Lyford Key there in the Bahamas. And so I've been there many, many times. And an important difference between Epstein and Nygard is that Nygard actually made money. Maybe he blew it later, but he actually made a lot of money. And it was in the fashion and design business. And people would say that his stock and trade was not to sell, limited run fashion, but instead to sell to Kmart and Target and that kind of stuff. And he'd been doing that for a long time and was well known. That said, Nygard bought this property, and I don't know if you had a chance to go to it or be in it.
Yes, yeah.
So it's in this fancy club, which is filled with people who really look down their nose. I mean, there are wild people in the club, but most of them are pretty conservative. And it's been a long-standing war, literally lawsuit war, between Nygard and Bacon and now the Bahamian government. I think he can't even go back to the Bahamas. Isn't that true?
Right. There's currently a warrant out for his arrest because he's in contempt of court for skipping various court appointments that he had in lawsuits with his neighbors.
Now, where is the Nygard Foundation based? Is it based in the Bahamas or is it based in Canada? Or
I believe it's based in Canada. But the charities were spread out all over. There is actually one that was, I tried to look into a little bit. There was one, the Nygard Genomic Foundation, I believe, that was founded in Kentucky. And the president or operating officer of that charity was a Kentucky businessman who was later arrested in St. Kitts on his way home from the stem cell clinic because he was found to be carrying an unregistered gun in his carry-on luggage. So first of all, how did a random guy from Kentucky get connected with, a secret stem cell clinic in St. Kitts? Why did he need a gun to be involved with that business? Certainly more questions remain.
Yeah, I'm told that St. Kitts is a place, I'm told by somebody who did this actually, St. Kitts is a place where you used to be, an American could become a citizen there. The guy, this very famous guy told me, actually he's a Lyford Key person, he told me that he paid, I think, $100,000 to become a citizen, and they told him that if he wanted to pay $3 million, he could be prime minister.
It's certainly in line with what I heard about not just St. Kitts but the Bahamas, and that was one of Nygard's MOs as well, paying off politicians throughout the whole ladder.
Yeah. So this foundation is a Florida, according to this record, it's a Florida corporation. Interesting that the name.
There's another one that's Kentucky that has genomics in the name. I'm not sure the exact formulation.
I was not able to find that on Google Earth looking for it, so that's interesting. It's very Clinton-esque of them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a trick, Melissa, that maybe you've encountered it already. With foundations, what you do, it's very important that you know the real name of the entity. So a foundation has a legal name. And what the Clintons have done is they very cleverly create all the people around the Clintons, all sorts of foundations with variations of the name.
Yes,
that then
yes.
allows you to wire money if you open bank accounts in a slightly different name and not put it into the foundation. So somebody takes a deduction. If they need any kind of proof that they made the deduction, made the donation, the recipient charity, the crooked charity, will write you a piece of paper saying, yeah, we got the money, when you didn't get the money, and then you use that money for whatever you want, for nefarious purposes, lifestyle, political campaigns. When you see somebody using many different foundations in many different jurisdictions, your hackles should go way up.
Yes, and that's exactly what we've seen with Jeffrey Epstein. That's exactly what I found with Peter Nygard. Again, that's kind of untangling Epstein's version of that is going to be the focus of the next Epstein book. But I haven't even been able to go that far digging into Nygard and his kind of web of different foundations and, what he was actually doing there.
So the other thing that I could tell you, and I'm not going to, Jason knows who it is, but please don't say the name, that I just met somebody who was in where I lived at one point, who had been to Nygard, who was an infamous penthouse pet of the year. And she described to me that it was just mayhem when she would go down there. I mean, she was all in for that, but it was, they apparently had, his main bedroom was on some kind of a system where it could be up two stories up, and then it could descend down to the lagoon, and and there was nobody really knew what was going on there, and even in that,
he actually told her.
I'm just getting super angry at Google Earth here. It won't let me plant the thing down in front of Nygard's place. I don't understand what's going on.
Cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, we're
sorry.
having all kinds of issues.
Can you hear us, Melissa?
Yeah, it was just kind of like
Clicking
getting static
stuff.
for a minute. But
Yeah.
So one of the things, we're good. Yeah. One of the things to know, Melissa, about the Bahamas, you probably know it already, but maybe our viewers don't know it. It's an archipelago of many, many islands, and it's typically pretty shallow water. You go a little bit out and it's quite deep in a place, but it's pretty shallow water. So fast boats can go from a remote location into the Bahamas, drop something off, and then leave with something else in the dead of night. And what better place to do that than the tip of this, this protected estate that Nygard has? You've been there, so you know what I'm talking about. So I hope the authorities are all over this.
And you know what? It's not even that much of a stretch to get to Miami on a boat from there and back in a day. Right.
Exactly. Right.
You certainly can pull a boat up right to the beach there. And I actually did that when I was in the Bahamas. I chartered a boat to take me over to Nygard Key. And the beaches in the Bahamas are actually public property up to the high tide line. So the boat was able to pull in really close. I jumped off and kind of swam up to the beach and got out and was able to walk around kind of the beachfront area, which is where he had, his massage hut on the water. I was able to go through there, the different bar stools and different tables that he had. And also I could kind of get pretty close to, some of the gym that he had, and I could see into, the rest of the property really closely. It's all decaying now. It doesn't look like anyone will ever return because, like I said before, he's pretty much barred effectively from ever going back there.
Yeah. Yeah. Now
this isn't it. Sorry. This is not it. This is
in Lyford Key, or?
Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to locate it. I put in Nygard Key. I couldn't find it.
There's a Nygard store at the mall out there.
Ah.
So that's what that is. And he actually is accused of using that store to recruit young women. Right. One of the alleged victims in the lawsuit currently against him says that she was recruited by female employees of that store right when it opened. You know, they promised her a gig modeling for him, and that led to her allegedly going out to the property, allegedly being subjected to sexual assault. And she said she never got a modeling gig until years later. And it was just at that little store in the mall.
Yeah, and a similar MO, of course, for Epstein and Victoria's Secret.
Yes.
Speaking of billionaires that are tough, whose lives are tough to explain, how would you compare and contrast Les Wexner to Nygard?
There's a lot that we still don't know about Les Wexner, his connections to Epstein. Honestly, we didn't get very far into that for the first book because we didn't have enough reporters to get out to Ohio in the timeline that we had. So honestly, there's not much that I know about him beyond what everybody else probably already knows.
Well, so my experience, I got out of Harvard Business School in 1980 and I went to Wall Street.
Oh.
And in the period where Epstein was supposedly on Wall Street and subsequently when he supposedly created an investment management business where he would only take on a client who would give him $1 billion, I will tell you that is complete crap. Nobody with his credentials, lack of credentials, would have been able to get a legitimate client to part with a $1 billion minimum account. I mean, there are other competitors out there who do know how to manage money. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, you name it, John Paulson eventually. And so the idea that this very wealthy businessman, active philanthropist, who bought Victoria's Secret, the original store, for nothing and really did create a gigantic business, that he would entrust all of his significant wealth and engage in these sweetheart deals with some, theoretical teacher out of Dalton who may have gotten a job at Bear Stearns and may have been involved in it's laughable. It's just laughable.
Yeah, not only did he give him his money, he gave him power of attorney at one point.
Nobody does that.
Everything.
Nobody does that.
It's unheard of.
Unless you have a gun to your head, right? I mean, so what leverage do you think Epstein may have had on Wexner?
I don't have any kind of inside reporting on Wexner specifically, but the kinds of leverage that Epstein was collecting on other people, we know for sure that he was surveilling people in all of his properties and the different activities that they got up to there. He was, kind of acting as a go-between on arms deals and illegal kind of international business deals. So those are the kinds of things that he would have leverage over someone. I've never heard specifically about what he would have had on Wexner.
Melissa,
he's someone that has really created an air of privacy around himself, and
I wonder if I could. Boy, that really is annoying. I thought I had it fixed. I wonder if I could shift your attention for a second to the Attorney General, who seems to have done nothing with regard to Epstein other than state that he was slightly outraged that while in the custody of a federal prison, he was hung or choked or whatever. What do we know about Donald Barr as the headmaster of Dalton?
So Charles and I talked about this a little bit offline, but it's really unclear how Epstein ended up at Dalton. I mean, we know he was there because he was photographed, but like Charles was mentioning before, he had very limited credentials. He was a college dropout.
Twice.
And so, what's that?
Twice. He dropped out of 2 schools.
So, he was certainly there. We don't know for sure what kind of decisions went into that, but certainly Barr was there up until just before. So he could ostensibly have been involved with the hiring of Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm sure you guys have seen that in a weird kind of link, Donald Barr, as kind of a side gig, wrote this bizarre science fiction book that involves the whole premise of the book is about like alien sex slaves.
That's the thing you have, Jason, isn't it?
No, actually, that's the thing that prompted me to get the thing that I have. Donald Barr wrote this book here called Space Relations, which is super weird. The thing that he wrote a bunch of weird things. Now, this is Donald Barr Chidsey, who I don't know if that's the same guy. And this is a new thing that I haven't seen before. This is Singapore Passage that also seems to show some kind of sex slave. The thing that I had from Donald Barr Chisley was called Argosy. And I got that, there it is, there's a picture of it. I got this from eBay, and I found it really interesting because the story in this pulp novel is called The Island of Runaway, the comic being called Argosy. I'm very interested in the Iran-Contra aspect. The movie, of course, with Ben Affleck was called Argo. So, I mean, these are all just coincidences. I don't know if they're connected at all. I do find these coincidental things pretty interesting. And Melissa, you know, you and I have just met on this Skype call for the first time. I think that this type of coded messaging is going on all the time. People have pointed out that in this photo, Donald Barr has 3 pens in his breast pocket, a little separator here, and then 3 additional pens, which some have said that this is a code for 33. And the other thing we've noticed is that these upturned eyebrows seem to appear a lot on these weirdo people who are connected to things that I'm not accusing Donald Barr of being involved with. But when I see these links in imagery, symbology, and possibly coded messages, I just point them out to people because they sometimes cause people who are looking at other factors, like, I mean, this thing with the 727 jets, that just can't be a coincidence that Nygard and Epstein are operating these legacy jets that are really difficult to maintain compared to a 737. No reason to use this inefficient jet with low bypass ratio engines. You can't upgrade them to the most, I mean, you could take a 737 and adapt all kinds of newer technology to it. They're available all over the place. Why do these 2 weirdo pedophile entrapment network, you know, freak show dudes fly this 727?
And why would you, as Bill Clinton, with other friends who have better jets, say, you know, I'm going to go on the Epstein jet, which I think, did the Epstein jet break down at some point on a trip? There was one of the jets.
Yeah. It was pretty old. Yeah.
It's 50
I
years
mean,
old.
that was honestly the first time when we got the photos of the interior of that jet, I had heard of the Lolita Express. We knew it was supposed to be like this, you know, jet setting kind of ambiance. When I first saw the photos, I was like, seriously? It's not really luxurious. You know, it looks like I think I described in the book as like a 1970s porno set. It's just like lots of polyester and like brown. It's not the most luxurious thing you could imagine, certainly.
Right. And just, you know, I've never flown on a private jet internationally, but I wouldn't want to. I mean,
how is it that I've done something fancy that you haven't, Charles?
I don't know, but I just wouldn't want to go on a private jet into Africa. I mean, you've got to...
Oh, well, Africa. Yeah. I flew on a job with Unisys to Europe. It was fantastic. At the end of the flight, they came over and said, hey, the CEO isn't going to eat this lobster. Do you want it? And I was like jamming lobster as we pulled into Teterboro.
Airplane lobster.
Yeah. But to Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
just it. Because you see, if you are Bill Clinton, why aren't they flying some extended range jet? This 737 would have to stop and refuel. You could take a Citation X. You could take any type of jet that would be faster, more fuel efficient, less stops. But they chose this one.
And you're aware, both of you, I think, that Doug Bann has three brothers, and that one of them is Bill Clinton's traveling doctor and would go on these trips.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You're aware that Deborah Birx's husband is an advanced person, or was an advanced person for Bill Clinton, specifically focused on international travel. I don't know if that was during the presidency, after the presidency, or both. But I got to believe that somebody who goes through bypass surgery in 2004, I believe it was early September 2004, would never travel on Epstein's jet. to Africa afterwards. His doctors would be saying, wait a minute, you're not in the best of health anyway. Why would you want to go on this rumble down jet to difficult countries where you can't be sure overnight that the plane will be maintained? The climate are challenging, the altitude is challenging. It's all plane.
Wait a minute. Bill Clinton's heart surgery was at the same hospital that Dead Ep was delivered to.
That who?
Epstein.
Well, it's a big hospital.
Well, but there's a lot of hospitals. That's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? Oh, sorry, the Columbia campus. No, that's a different hospital. Yeah. The same hospital network that
it's a big
Epstein
hospital.
goes into.
It's a big hospital. So, is your latest book on Nygard, is it in hardcover yet, or is it just in Kindle?
Yes, it is somewhere, but because of what's going on, Amazon's not accepting deliveries to their warehouses, so you can't get the hardcover just yet. But certainly on Kindle, if you don't have a Kindle, you can still buy it and read it on the cloud reader, on your computer, on your laptop, or on your iPad. That's super easy. It's also available at Barnes & Noble on Nook.
And are you ever going to go on a book tour, or are you subject to...
I mean, a virtual book tour. I'm doing it right now, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But hopefully, just yesterday, they added 46 new plaintiffs to the lawsuit against him, alleged victims. So There's certainly going to be continued news and stories about this. And we're hopeful that, the story will get more spotlight in the mainstream media, and that we'll be able to finally see some justice.
That's fantastic. And
Epstein Inc. is going to be coming out later this year on a lot of things that we talked about.
That's fantastic.
Looks like you can get the hardcover from Barnes & Noble.
Oh, that's new. Yeah, it's such a changing situation day to day.
Pick up curbside, so if you don't want to deal with all the cooties in Barnes & Noble, you can just get coronavirus on the curbside. That's good. That's appealing. Yeah.
Just leave it outside your front step for 3 days, and then it's good to read.
Fumigate it.
So have we put Melissa's website up?
Oh, yes,
in case people want to contact her?
People should absolutely visit melissaecronin.com. Have you been experiencing any racism due to the similarities between Cronin and coronavirus?
Not yet.
Good.
Now that you put it out there, I'm sure someone in the comments is going to mention it.
I didn't mean to do that. But there are 3 books, of course: Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, the new book, Predator King, and Epstein Inc., the book that will come out soon. When was Dead Men Tell No Tales released?
That was released back first week in December.
Yeah. And do you use Twitter much?
Yes, I do. I'm just I started it with Dead Men Tell No Tales, so my follower count's pretty low, but I invite everyone to please follow me, and I'll keep you posted on everything I'm finding out about Nygard and Epstein, especially as I kind of ramp up the investigation for the next book.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of reading your first book, and I reached out to your publicist, and I guess it just took a little time to get this together. I'm delighted that you've spent so much of your valuable time with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Our pleasure. Do you have any questions for us?
Well, why don't
I'll
Melissa...
just continue to be watching your episodes also, and certainly we'll be emailing back and forth about what we find, I'm sure.
I'm going to stay on you about the 727 aspect. And, before you go, Melissa, I'd love to just walk you through this bit of artwork that I've created for the show today. This is, again, Charles and I have a lot of people watching the show think that I'm somehow imposing my will on you, Charles.
No,
that never happens. But this was an idea we came up with. Of course, everybody knows the film Zoolander. And it was quite tricky to get Mr. Epstein into the signature pose. But we've got all the usual suspects here: Ghislaine Maxwell, Bill Clinton. I've seen the film, of course, but I don't remember the name of this crazy guy who...
Mugatu.
There you go, Mugatu. Bill Clinton as Mugatu. And of course, Hillary is always looking very pale. Nygard almost looked exactly like Luke, what's-his-name's character, so he just stuck right in there.
I think he's worn that outfit in the past, probably.
Exactly. The clothing was almost exactly the same. So,
if not, he'll
SCREWLANDER.
certainly design it.
Yeah. Screwlander is the title for today. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Melissa. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss before we wrap it up?
No, I thank you guys both for your time. And I really do hope that it's a continuing conversation because
Absolutely.
so many messages to uncover and encode.
Absolutely.
Great, Melissa. Well, have a wonderful day out there and good luck with this book.
Thanks. Have a good day too. Bye-bye.
You too, Melissa. Wonderful to have you, and we'll speak with you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Well, there you go, Charles. Excellent guest, Melissa Cronin.
Fantastic.
Yeah, really wonderful work that she's doing with the books about Jeffrey Epstein. I'm glad that we were able to let her know about that. I can't believe Nygard has a 727 as well. I know Dieter is going to be, I haven't been really looking at the comments, but I know Dieter is going to look into that. You know, there was a 727 that was stolen off the runway in like Angola or something like that. The CIA got involved in the investigation of the theft. There's a lot of interest in these 727s. We're going to have to keep our eyes on that. And I guess that's it for today.
No, I wanted to talk to you about the playlist. I think.
Oh, okay,
right?
sure.
I mean, we've gone quiet trying to obey the sheltering in place order here in New York. It's very interesting. A number of things have happened, I think, as a result of this lockdown of the economy. Forget the negative aspects for a second. But one thing that I think is very positive that's happened is that the mainstream media has had to operate the way you're operating, basically. And these big channels, CNBC, Bloomberg, you name it, Fox, everyone is doing podcasts or the equivalent of podcasts or doing remote tie-ins.
And everybody realizes they suck.
Exactly. And in contrast, your viewership, I mean, is just soaring.
Yeah.
Your subscribership, your viewership. We've been beset by technical problems, which are not of our own making here, but and they could be, you know, hostile actions. But there have been a large number of shows that we've done, including walking around shows. I guess, is this 221 including the walking around or excluding?
No, yeah, including those.
Including? Okay.
I've added them all.
All right.
Because we started the walk around.
There's Phallus.
No,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Where is Escape from New York?
Yeah, I don't think it is all of them.
Oh, I might have forgotten to include No Escape from New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so there's more than 222. I'll have to go back and keep the playlist current.
But it's interesting to see that just this landing page here, where you know, just to the list of all of our shows that Jason so ably puts together, just this introductory page has nearly 40,000 views. It's just a table of contents.
It's pretty good.
What's the view count? Can we get the view count for the whole thing, or is that impossible?
Well, I think
that
there
tough
is
to
a
do?
way to do it. We've got to get into the analytics section
If you don't want to do it live.
No, well, I think it might be a smoother thing to prepare and then have ready for maybe next week or maybe on Sunday.
Sure.
We can have that ready.
Yeah. Because I think it's really a tribute to what you've done here. You've crossed the 100,000 mark on the subscribership for the main channel, and you're up to what on the Crowdsource 2?
17,500, so that's growing nicely as well. Charles, I also want to thank the people that have been joining as sponsors on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I'm getting great feedback from people who are, enjoying the sponsor exclusive content. It's almost like double the whole library, because for almost every show there's also a sponsor exclusive show. So people who really want to get into all of the subjects that we're covering should definitely get onto patreon.com and also to Subscribestar. There was that announcement from YouTube yesterday that anything that goes against the WHO they're going to get rid of. So it's like, well, how is that even remotely approaching? You can't have journalism on something where any counterpoint to a point is immediately chopped.
Well, and you're basically that I think super arrogant and apparently not too intelligent CEO of YouTube is making the case, the government's case, against Google, against YouTube. I mean, we have a very limited number of pipes now through which this type of content goes. You've got Google and YouTube, you've got Facebook, you've got Periscope, and the idea that somebody who may or may not have any real bandwidth, this is a different person, Jason.
Yeah, I can't spell her last name, and I put in YouTube CEO and Melissa, and it doesn't bring her up. Obviously, Google doesn't want us to look at this woman.
Right here.
Wojcicki or whatever her name is.
So if it is true that Google is just not involved in content at all, right, and is just like a cellular phone provider or a landline provider, then they should have their protections. But in this case, they're going to now take a real story and bury it. And that real story is something we've been working on for 3 years. The idea that these multilateral aid organizations get a large amount of money sent into, in this case, Switzerland, that the WHO is not run by a medical doctor, has not made sure over time that different nations, particularly in the poorer countries, poorer parts of the world, that those nations get their healthcare systems upgraded to a point where the world becomes more insulated from a pandemic. I mean, the very point of all this to me is that, and the selfish reason, frankly, to send money and people and other resources into these very poor countries is they could well be breeding grounds for COVID-20 or a worse version.
Bill Gates is working on COVID-20 and Windows 11. They're both going to suck.
Along with Joe Biden.
Actually, Charles, I'm just getting a message here. It's scrolled by, but the total is 23.5 million views. And here's Dieter saying, Boeing Super 727, Peter Nygard. It's a video about Nygard's 727 with inside footage. I'll definitely be looking at that. Mm-hmm. Dieter has been all over the 727 stories, which is really good because there's a lot of interesting ones. And I mean, again, this is one of these things that I arrived at perhaps with a weird hunch. But as we look into it further, I don't think that's a coincidence.
Right. Very well done, Jason.
Thank you, Charles. Sometimes, ferreting out these weird things can lead us to good conclusions.
Very good.
Speaking of conclusions, Charles, I think we've reached ours for today.
Very good, Jason.
Nice transition, right?
Very well done.
All right, Charles. So Sunday we'll be back. I have been trying to get to some outdoor adventures. I know people like to see what's going on in New York, but it's difficult for me to balance the time between, phone calls and following up with the emails, helping people with tech support on Patreon, and everyone's trying to use their phone or their tablet or Windows, or we got people who are watching with Linux and Brave browser. So it's really overwhelming to deal with all these different combinations of things. So I'm going to try to tend to some of that today, and we'll be back on Sunday.
Looking forward.
Wonderful episode, Charles. Thank you for putting that together with Melissa. And thanks everybody for watching. See you soon.